The thing I'd emphasise is pictures and stories. From the youngest age, my mother gave me wonderful children's books and children's magazines, and I still remember vividly the pictures of world history and natural history in those. And they got me interested from a very young very young age, in the history of the world and the nature of the world. And I developed an emergent passion to understand the way the world actually was. This was crystallised when I was about 10 years old, when a school teacher read us The Lord of the Rings in class. And apart from fascination with the story itself, what I took away from it was that here was an example of how a whole world in space and time, with languages and cultures, with poetry and song and drama and moral challenges, all fitted together. And from that point, as I grew up, I wanted that, but I wanted it of the real world. I wasn't really interested in fantasy, I was interested in actuality. And that shaped the way I approached my university studies. I didn't seek a vocational training and a profession in which I could simply make money and participate in public life. I sought an understanding through history and international relations of how everything fitted together. Once I had a doctorate, I thought, how do I make use of that in some practical sense, because I didn't particularly want to be a boffin. So I worked in the intelligence community, and that got me to work on East Asia, which was particularly interesting. But I got frustrated with bureaucracy, and so I moved out of the intelligence service some 15 years ago. And it was after that that I wrote most of the work that has appeared in The West in a Nutshell. I think the enduring life interests are primarily those of meaning and understanding, and that takes two forms. Understanding, let's put that first, has to do with what is in fact the nature of the world, what is the nature of truth, what is the geological and biological history of the world as distinct from myths or religious fables about it. How does the world really work in geopolitical terms, and what are serious answers, as distinct from trite or ideological ones, about the dilemmas facing humanity? At the level of meaning, I'm particularly interested in the arts, in poetry, I write poetry, and in intimacy, in the way in which meaning is shared between human beings, in communities or in intimate couples. So those two interests, understanding and meaning, are translated into much of what I do. The understanding finds its way into my professional life in consulting on argument analysis and business decision making. The meaning is bound up in my writing, and particularly this present book and other work that I'm currently working on. The Lord of the Rings and early children's stories and books had a big influence on the beginnings and flowering of my imagination. Not long after that, I started to read very serious books about geopolitics. As a 12-year-old, I got fascinated by the communist revolutions of the 20th century. I read the biographies of Stalin, of Mao Zedong. I read William Shirer's The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. I was also interested in ancient history, and I read books about ancient Greece and Rome, Livy and Tacitus, and books by people like Moses Finley about the ancient Greeks. And all of this fed into this emergent passion to understand the world, both present and past. Those were certainly formative influences. A little later on, of course, there were many others, but one that I would name in particular, it was formative to the way I thought about world affairs in my PhD, was reading about the life of Daniel Ellsberg and his reflections on the difficulties of making good policy in the United States government during the Cold War. Needless to say, those difficulties were not confined to the United States, but that was a particularly lucid study in it, and I took it to heart both in my own research and in working in the Australian government. In terms of major writing works, actually to my honours thesis, which was on the general strike and student revolt in France in May, June 1968, in that instance, I simply wanted to understand what had led to the student rebellions of the 1960s, which at that point were only a decade and a half behind us. And after that, I did a doctorate in international relations. The dissertation was a study of US intervention in the Philippines, Vietnam and El Salvador during the Cold War. And what I was grappling with there was, why was there a Cold War at all? And how had the US understood the challenges of counterinsurgency? And had it exhibited a capacity to develop proactive and intelligent policies in that regard or not? And I need hardly add that the findings were not particularly encouraging. Since then, I've published a number of works. In the 1990s, one was a study of land reform debates in the Philippines, the nature of truth and government policy. That was in 1990. More recently, after working in the intelligence service on East Asia, I published a book on China called Thunder from the Silent Zone, Rethinking China. which was intended to communicate to a wide, practical and intelligent readership how do we understand the rise of China in our time and its significance from a point of view of economics, of geopolitics, of human rights and democratisation. At the same time that those things were happening in my professional life, in my private life, as it were, in the world of meaning, I had written love poetry. So in 2005, 2006, Beralia Books published a book of my love poetry called Sonnets to a Promiscuous Beauty, a homage to the Western canon. Subsequent to that, partly as a byproduct of my consulting work, I wrote a book on the industrial relations debate in 2007 called Fair Choices. And even as that book was being written, I had written a great many essays, in fact over the previous decade, and 30 of those were selected to produce this present book, The West in a Nutshell, an overview of Western civilization and the roots of our humanity. And I guess as a coda to all of that, I could say that I'm writing another book, which is expected to come out under the Beralia imprint in 2010, called Darkness Over Love, which takes us back into the world of meaning, intimacy and poetry. Enduring beliefs is a slightly tricky question because to many people beliefs are matters of faith or ideological commitment, and I'm wary of both of those things. I would say that a number of background orientations affect the way I look at things. One of those is a great belief in human freedom and the capacity of human beings, when educated, informed, disciplined and imaginative, to do the most remarkable things. But rather than beliefs, I tend to emphasise opinions and perceptions, since these are by their nature open to change and correction as we learn, and there's a great deal to learn. And what I set out to learn and continue to inquire into is what is in fact the history of life on the planet, what are in fact the challenges we face, what are in fact the most intelligent solutions to those challenges, and how can we best collaborate to bring those solutions into being. My aspirations vary between profound irony and pessimism and soaring ambition, it must be said. In literary terms, I would really like, and I'm trying in this next book I'm writing, Darkness Over Love, to actually create a profound and deeply moving book about poetry and its place in human life and in the nature of human intimacy. And in the world of meaning and expression, I aspire at least to go back and teach myself other languages and music. I would like not only to write poetry but songs. I love music, it's very important to my life. At the, shall we say, the public or objective level, I'm very interested ongoingly in geopolitics and the future of the planet. And alongside Darkness Over Love, I have plans for writing, as it were, scholarly works to do with the future of world security and international institutions. I think that The West in a Nutshell is a very special book for me, and I hope it will prove to be for others. In many respects, it's the harvest of 30 years of trying to understand Western civilization in particular, and how our humanity was formed and how the world works. If I referred earlier, I did refer earlier to The Lord of the Rings as very formative in my imagination, and as a boy it made me want to be Elrond, somebody who actually could look back thousands of years and reflect wisely on what had occurred. And I'd like to think that at least to some modest extent The West in a Nutshell captures that kind of wisdom and perspective.